This is the story of man's first disobedience, how women were disenfranchised because of their view as sinners, and the Women's Bible and their attempt to find out whether or not women were capable of being created in God's image, and whether or not they could still be seen as sinners, as if they were sinners, or if they were going to be capable of and worthy of exercising political rights. And we will start off with the story of Paradise Lost and how it relates to the story of Adam and Eve. About how Eve was mankind's first disobedience, and because she bit into that fruit of that forbidden tree, she would condemn herself and Adam by bringing death into the world and be set by woes. Eve would be set with the woe of pregnancy, and Adam would be set with the woe of hard labor. Elizabeth Cady Stanton take a stand against this viewpoint. She was born in 1815 in Johnstown, New York. Her father was a legal scholar, a lawyer, and a New York assemblyman. From him, she would learn about the legal process and become active in political affairs. In 1840, she would marry Henry Stanton, who was an ardent abolitionist, and while on honeymoon to London, she would meet Lucretia Mott, who was another feminist and abolitionist. Together, they would realize that women had been excluded from an abolitionist convention they were at, and how wrong this was, despite all the work they were putting into the movement. Because of this, in 1840, she would be one of the co-authors of the Declaration of Sentiments, sometimes referred to as the Women's Declaration of Independence, at the Seneca Falls Convention. After the Civil War, she would oppose the 14th and 15th Amendments on the grounds that it only enfranchised men and did not enfranchise the women who were hard at work for the Union's cause. Over the course of several decades, she would help reconcile some of the splits within the feminist movement. And this would come to a head, in 1895 when she would co-author the Women's Bible. The context in which it is written is that it was a time of great religious fervor, known as the Second Great Awakening. The idea was that this was a Protestant Reformation, which said that in order to get into heaven, you would not only need salvation through faith alone, but you would also need to act morally good and help prepare for Jesus' second coming by helping to build a better society. This took the form of things such as temperance, the prison reform, and abolitionism, where women took a major part in. However, despite the fact women were active in political politics and did much for the Union war effort, they faced several objections to gaining the right to vote, one of which was on religious grounds. Because women were seen as the children of Eve, they were not only the first sinner, because of the forbidden fruit, but they were also going to doom mankind again if they were allowed to vote. And as we can see in Paradise Lost, which had a profound effect on how people saw women, Adam was very, very happy to see Eve as inferior. For well I understand in the prime end of nature, her inferior in the mind and inward faculties which most excel, in outward also her resembling less his image who made both, and less expressing the character of that dominion given. Not only is Eve less capable of being faithful to God, but she is not even created as much as his image as man is. Would you want a sinner to vote? Would you want a sinner to decide whether or not mankind was worthy of salvation when Jesus came again? The Women's Bible attempts to answer that question. First assumption that they make is that the Bible had been mistranslated, and that because of this mistranslation, women were being subjugated by men. Whether this was intentionally or not, they do not make that claim, but it is worth noting that it has been mistranslated. The second is that they try to go ahead and remove a literal interpretation of the Bible, instead try to root it in allegories and symbolism. One such case of this was when they were talking about how Eve could not have been into an apple because apples had not yet been discovered, and that Eden was too far up north for apples to grow. And the story of Genesis doesn't make any sense either, because supposedly this is when man was created, but Adam had not yet been created in the story of Adam and Eve. Rather, what they do is say that this was simply about how mankind was created, and that Adam and Eve were not only the first people born, but they were still both considered in God's image. And because Adam and Eve received this update and how to view them, they were no longer seen as inferior in terms of one or the other. Eve was not actually created out of Adam's rib, it's just an analogy for something long and bony. And this all also happened to take place within the context of the Industrial Revolution. Yes, in the past, Eve may have been burdened with childbirth, but no longer did it have to be necessarily a bad thing. And likewise, man did not have to suffer through the burden of hard labor in the fields because of updates in technology. The trace is that this acts as the reinterpretation of the Bible and tries to answer the idea that women are capable of salvation through faith alone. It sets up women as being not only equal to men, but capable of reading and learning through faith themselves. We also get a response to Paradise Lost and how they protrude the idea of mankind. And then with these updates to references to new technologies, they were able to help steer it away from a kind of fundamentalism, instead rooted in symbolic understanding of the world. There are several weaknesses, however. The first is that it does not take into account different religions or other sects of Christianity. The second is that this is primarily told through the perspective of upper middle class white women, and that this in turn will mean that some people are necessarily going to still be viewed as inferior because of that. And the third and perhaps greatest problem is that it lacks biblical authority. Why should anyone believe this when none of the authors themselves are great Christian scholars? For that reason, it would be sort of on the wayside, just an interesting stopping point in the history of the first wave of feminism, and really wouldn't get its credit it deserved until the second wave of feminism, when it became a background for how women could see how they could take the language of oppressors and use it against them in order to gain their own self-awareness and to undermine that hegemonic power. And because of this here, we no longer see problems such as the children of Eve. Women are not necessarily now brought about in terms about their relationship to Eve, but rather through the relationship of the society around them. In terms of future topics, if we wanted to update the book, we could try to cement a biblical authority and to see if women are really capable of understanding the world around them through more authority on the topic. The second is that we can include other versions of Christianity and see what they have to say and see if we can reconcile some of these problems at that time. We can also update the kind of feminism that was required. Women were defined in terms of their essence towards God and how God created them. But we can also look about this in terms of social construct theory and see about LGBT people and how they can be reconciled within Christendom. We can expand on the idea of salvation through faith alone and its ties to political activism as well, and see what we can update in terms of the modern world. And as we began Paradise Lost, so too shall we end. Looking back on the eastern side beheld of paradise, so late their happy sea, waved over by that flaming brand. The gate with dreadful faces thronged in fiery arms, some natural tears had dropped by wiped them soon. The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest and Providence their guide. They hand in hand with wandering steps and through Eden took their solitary way. And as Adam and Eve left Eden, so too should we have to leave this for right now. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.